Hi everyone, welcome to a reading vlog. As you can tell from what I am assuming I will title this video, we have a very exciting vlog, which is I am vlogging rereading Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillier. This is the first book in the Seven Water series. And I mean, if you've watched my channel at all, you probably know that Juliet Marillier is one of my all-time favorite authors. Her Seven Water series is my favorite series from her. And this is a series that I have a long history with, reading and rereading many times. But it has been quite a few years now since I have reread this. I think the last time I reread this was like 5 or 6 years ago, which is a long time for me. I used to reread this series much more frequently, and recently I was in the mood to reread it, so I thought that this time around I would try vlogging the experience for anyone who is interested. I will say I am planning to include spoilers in this vlog, so if you are not if you don't want to see any spoilers, I do have other videos that are about Juliet Marillier's books or the Seven Waters books in particular, so I'll link those in the description. So if you're still watching, I'm assuming that you probably have already read the book and you know what it's about, but just briefly to kick us off with this. This is a historical fantasy retelling of the story of the Six Swans, which is set in like early medieval Ireland. Maybe it's like slightly pre-medieval. I think it's early medieval Ireland. And we're following the family of Seven Waters. So Seven Waters is a chiefdom that is surrounded by a magical forest. And so the people of Seven Waters have kind of a symbiotic relationship with this forest. There's also a lot of magic and folklore associated with the forest, especially folklore surrounding the fair folk and other beings that may be living in the forest. Our main character is Sorca, or Sorca. I am not 100% sure how to pronounce her name. Every time I read this book, I look it up and try to figure out the pronunciation, and I always get like at least 3 different pronunciation suggestions, but I think the correct pronunciation is Sorca. But Sorca is our main character. She is the daughter of the chief of Seven Waters, and she has 6 older brothers. When she was born, her mother died in childbirth, and when her mother died, her father really changed. So Sorca and her brothers were really left to raise themselves, and she was raised by her 6 older brothers. So she's very they've a little bit like run wild in some ways, because they didn't really have a parental figure guiding them, but they all are very close, and she loves her brothers very much as she has grown up with them. And Sorca is very content with their lives as it is at the moment. Then, of course, following the story of the 6 swans, their father remarries, and the woman happens to be a sorceress who wants to take control of Seven Waters, and so she curses the brothers, turning them into swans, and Sorca is the only one who is able to save them by going through various trials. So some first thoughts about this. I am about 2 chapters into this book, which is 80 pages. I always forget just how long the chapters are in this book. The chapters are like 40-page chapters, so yeah, I'm 80 pages in, 2 chapters, and so far I am really enjoying this reread. I had a bit of a slow start because I am kind of coming off of, or hopefully coming off of, a reading slump. I just really haven't been reading very much, haven't felt very motivated or focused to read. And so I'm also kind of hoping that rereading this series that I love will help bring me out of this reading slump and help me feel more excited about reading, more motivated to read, and really get back into the habit of reading consistently. So the beginning was a little slow for me because I've kind of been like coming out of this reading slump, but as I've gotten into it, like I'm much more into it now, and I'm very excited about this reread. Some of my thoughts at this point in the story, one is just how much time is spent on really establishing Seven Waters and each of the brothers, their unique personalities, their relationships to Sorca. Sometimes I feel like authors are afraid to really spend that much time on this kind of quieter introduction to a story because maybe they're afraid that they will lose the attention of their readers if they don't like get right into the action or the meat of the story. But I think it's such an important way to start a story like this, where the core motivation is around her love and dedication to her family, and how that informs her and also gives her the strength to do the things that she needs to do. So really glad that it's spending that much time, and I have not even like reached the end of that. I think that I don't think they get cursed until like the end of chapter 4, so I have another probably like 80 pages or something of this setup. So at least like the first quarter of the book is really focused on this setup. I think another thing that has really stood out to me this time reading it is seeing how much Sorca's view and understanding of the world and the people around her is changing. I think there are two specific moments so far that have really kind of moved her or, you know, pushed her to realize that things are changing and that she and her brothers are growing up. The first is when her oldest brother Liam gets engaged to, is it Elise or Eyeless, and Sorca is very clearly resistant to it and like is aware that she's like, I don't want things to change. I don't understand why he even likes her. It's very much the same vibe of the most recent like Greta Gerwig version of Little Women. There's that scene when Jo is talking to her oldest sister right before she gets married, and she's being like, run away with me, we'll start our own lives, you don't need to marry this guy. And she says like, you'll be bored of him in 2 years and we will be interesting forever. It's very much the same vibe for Sorca at this moment. And so that's kind of the first point that is like pushing her to reckon with that people are growing up and things are changing. And then I think the next is when Simon is captured. So they bring in this prisoner who she then finds out is tortured. She and Finbar help, her brother Finbar help him escape. And then after that, she goes and helps to heal Simon from his wounds. But now she has seen the aftermath of the torture that her father ordered. And she has this moment of like dissonance and having to reconcile how kind her brothers are to her and how much she loves them, and then the fact that they could be out there doing these terrible things, or if they are not directly doing them, at least condoning them. Two other just quick things is in this second chapter we got our first encounter with the Lady of the Forest, which is very exciting, and we also got a little bit of backstory about their father, and that, you know, we knew that he was changed after the death of their mother, but we got to hear a little bit more about like just how changed he is, and that he actually originally had the potential to become one of the wise ones, like a druid. But where I'm at the moment, Simon, who's the prisoner, is living with oh, I forgot what his name is. Is it brother, like Brian, I think, who's a cleric that lives kind of as a hermit. Sorca is also staying with them and is helping Simon. And that is where we're at the moment. Hello, so I have read another 2 chapters, so I'm another 80-ish pages in. And in this time, we have finally met the Lady Una, who is the worst. I don't think that's a hot take in any shape or form, because she is the main villain of this story, where you're meant to hate her. But oh my god, I hate her so much. I just still feel the need to say it. And I think what like is the most infuriating is not even like the literal evil stuff that she does, because she does like big evil things, you know, like literal evil where she is systematically and magically like destroying everything that they love in their lives, turning people against each other, and, you know, killing animals. Like there's so many animals that die in this part, and just like destroying everything with her magic. And yet, because that's like magical, you know, it feels a little less relatable, whereas the part that is like just normal person, the way she just like sweeps in and is like, I'm taking over everything, and especially how she like talks to Sorca, where she's just like, I'm gonna take you under my wing and change your entire life because everything you've done up until this point is pointless. All of the relationships that you've made, meaningless. The ways you've helped your community, irrelevant. The skills that you have built, useless. Like none of it matters because it's not ladylike and not the way I think you should be doing things. And like, this is truly the least of her evils, and yet it is the thing that is the most infuriating to me. So Lady Una's the worst. But we have met Lady Una. She is systematically destroying everything that they love. And so the siblings decide to do a ritual to try and summon the Lady of the Forest to their aid. But instead, Lady Una shows up and curses them to all become swans, or the brothers to swans. And Sorca gets away. She encounters the Lady of the Forest. And the Lady of the Forest, first of all, gives no reason for why she didn't actually show up when they called her, when it would have actually been useful to them. The reasoning probably was something like, it was fate, this had to happen, which is annoying. But I would have appreciated even a little bit of a reason. But then also, the Lady of the Forest is like, I am here for you in your time of greatest need. And it's like, in my head, I'm like, this is not her moment of greatest need. Her moment of greatest need was like 10 minutes ago when her brothers were being turned into swans. And you were there. Like, what are you doing? This is not the moment of greatest need. This is like the moment of second greatest need, you know? Anyways, the Lady of the Forest was annoying me. But Sorca, you know, gets her instructions, and now knows what her task is, that she has to be silent, no sound can pass her lips, and she has to weave these 6 shirts out of starwort, which will, you know, sting her and be very painful. So, you know, the main thrust of the story is now on its way. She has her task. One thing that I was thinking about, kind of going back to something that I mentioned in the last clip about like how the book spends time in those first 2 chapters establishing each of the brothers, their relationship to Sorca, some of the things about like their unique interests and the things that they care about, which we also get even more about like as we're watching Lady Una destroy everything in their lives. And I think that, you know, that time in where it's establishing like 7 waters, but also more particularly the brothers, is coming back around to kind of pay off in a way, because when the brothers are turned into swans, I think it is made even more poignant by the fact that we know these things about their lives. We know who they're becoming, the things that they care about, the plans that they had. And so you can feel the poignancy of that potential, those potential lives and futures and plans just being ripped away from them. So it is not only Sorca's fear and grief, but it is like the grief of the brothers of like losing that potential future. So still just appreciating having time to like, you know, establish characters and motivations so that those moments have like layers of impact to them. I know some really tough parts of the book are coming up, so bracing myself for that. I recently got some new plants and redid like the plant distribution on my bookcases. So I thought I would show you my plants. Of course, there are still some areas like where there are just random boxes that I still have not unpacked, even though I've been here like almost a year. But just ignore those. Pay attention to the lovely plants at the top. This is one of my new plants. This is a philodendron, I think. It's a type of philodendron, and I love this plant. This may be my new favorite plant. Don't tell the other ones, but I don't know how well you can see, but it has this really velvety texture to the leaves, and then it has these beautiful like kind of reddish accents to it. I just love this plant so much. This is another one of my new ones that I think is a silver pothos or a spotted pothos. I'm not totally sure because the tag said pothos, but then the people at the store said it was something else. So I'm not totally sure, but I really love that it adds kind of a different color and texture to like the plants that I have. Also on this bookcase, I have some little nerve plants that are here. I love nerve plants. I think they're so cute. So I just got some little baby ones to sit on the shelves. And then over here is my plant shelf, which still has some books on it, but is mostly plants. This is one of my new plants also. I think this is a spotted begonia, which I am really loving. These ones has very similar coloring to the philodendron, that has this dark green with like the red underneath. And it's just so beautiful. It looks almost magical with like the speckles and everything. So I'm very excited about this one. I think it also adds a really interesting like color and texture. And then down here is another one of the new plants that I got. Hello, Merlin. Hi, he's very curious about what I'm doing. But this is a money plant, I think. And money plants are a pet safe plant, which is why this is on a lower shelf. He doesn't really eat plants as far as I can tell, but just to be safe, I try to keep the, you know, ones that aren't good for pets higher up and the pet safe ones on lower shelves. I really like how full it is looking and that there is some new like color and texture to it. You might hear some like squeaking or banging around, or this might shake a little bit because Merlin is very curious about what it is I'm doing and he wants to participate. So he is chewing on a toy like right next to me because he has not yet figured out what this whole filming and vlogging thing is, and he's very confused by the tripod, so he might make trouble while I'm trying to do this. But I have read 3 more chapters of Daughter of the Forest, chapters 5, 6, and 7, which was almost 100 pages, and lots of things have happened. So in chapters 5 and 6, we're mostly focused on Sorca essentially just making progress in her task. Now that her brothers are swans and she has her task, She is secluded in a cave in the forest. Lynn, the dog, is with her. She is collecting starwort. She is, you know, turning it into thread and trying to weave it into shirts. And it is, of course, a very painful and arduous process. I think she is like, I think about 1.5 years passes during this time because her brothers turn back into humans and can come visit her twice a year on the summer and winter solstice. And I think we get about 3 visits during this time. So it's about 1.5 years. And it's interesting to see that some of them are coping with this better than others. They are all kind of coping with it in different ways that Sorca is observing. 2 of them, like Cormac and Patrick, are both doing fairly well because they are the kind of people who are really just like, I just deal with what's right in front of me. The oldest 2, I think, are much more focused on like getting back to their lives or what has been lost. And then it seems like Connor and Finbar are both like, as the ones who are most similar to Sorca in having this kind of magical and far-seeing perspective, they're coping with it very differently. Because I think Connor, because he has this calling and the structure of this path that he is on, this purpose of becoming a druid, in some ways that helps him to cope with this change and see the bigger picture and kind of keep himself like on this path. Whereas Finbar, he has these like abilities, he has some kind of seer ability as well, but he doesn't have that same like structure and purpose that Connor has. And so he seems to really be struggling with this whole experience of like turning back and forth into swans. So it's interesting to see how they're all coping with this in different ways. It also has been really interesting to see that there's kind of a role reversal for them, because up until this point, of course, her brothers have been very protective of Sorca, especially because like she is both the youngest and the only daughter in their family, and they essentially raised her because her mother died and their father was pretty checked out from her life, and so her brothers have really raised her, so they have this very protective relationship to her. And now they're in a situation where like they, 1, cannot protect her because 99% of the time they're swans, and 2, they actually have to rely on her to save them, which is something that they've never had to do before. And I think some of them also are struggling more with that role reversal than others. Both in like struggling with the guilt of not being able to protect their sister and struggling with, you know, this new role that she has and having to put their trust and faith in her that like she will be able to protect them, or believe that she even should. Some of them, you know, feel like she should not have to sacrifice so much for them. And then there are some who really believe that she can do this. I mean, not that the others don't believe she can do this, but they're still just more skeptical because they're very like entrenched in this relationship to her of like, oh, you're our baby sister, that we protect you, and they can't really, they're not like transitioning to this new dynamic easily. I feel like this time that I'm reading it, I'm really focusing a lot on the brothers, but I think they're really interesting, and I like how much they are, how much we get to learn about them. But her brother's inability to protect her becomes, you know, especially poignant in this section, because this is when the assault happens. Sorca is essayed in the forest by some locals who come across her. They also kill Lynn the dog. It is all around a horrific part of the book. It is a fairly graphic scene, and I know that when people read this book for the first time, like I've seen a lot of like debate over how that scene is handled. I know that somewhere I saw I don't know if it was like an interview or a blog post where Juliet Marillier was talking about the way that she wrote that scene, and she was saying that, you know, this is her debut novel, and she was saying that if she was writing this book again, she probably would have approached that scene differently, and maybe it would have been less graphic. So I think that her approach to that kind of scene has probably changed over time. And if I can find I don't know, again, if it was like an interview or a blog post or something, if I can find it again where she was saying that like she may have done it differently, I'll link it in the description. I'll see if I can find where I read that. There's a point a little bit before it happens where Sorca finds like an altar in the forest where people had left offerings, either like to the forest or the fair folk, and it's food, and she takes the food and eats it. And then there's this point where it kind of indicates that later events are maybe like a punishment for taking this offering that doesn't belong to her. And so I was like, is this trying to imply that the assault is like a punishment for taking this offering? Because if so, that's not it's not a very clear connection that is made there, and also that seems like a very extreme punishment for what she actually did. Granted, it would be like it does involve the fair folk, and like they've never been known for their like reasonableness. When she finds the food, there's this part where it says, hindsight is a fine thing. At the time, safe back by our little fire, sharing this wonderful unexpected feast, as dusk fell, I basked in the forest protection, and I never thought such a small act could herald such terrible consequences. But what are those consequences? And so like, what consequences are they like talking about? And then so far, that moment is never referenced again. So it's just like unclear to me. Like, is it saying that that assault is like related to her taking the food? Anyway, that's one thing. The other thing is, well, another thing is that Finbar apparently had some kind of vision of this happening, and he chooses not to warn Sorca, which, I mean, I think in his mind he's trying to protect her, because he's like, I don't know if this is really a true vision of something that will happen, or if this is essentially just my own anxiety like making up a vision in my head, and so he doesn't want to like scare her for no reason. I felt like it was kind of weird that he didn't warn her of what might happen. Like, I understand from his perspective, I guess, why that made sense, but I feel like he should have told her. But the whole section, like when the assault happens and afterwards, and the first time she sees her brothers again, because they're really the first people she encounters after this. And like, oh my gosh, that whole section was just devastating and like made me cry, which I actually don't cry at books very often, but like it was so sad. And you know, how it has changed Sorca, her perspective on like the world, and also her relationships to her brothers, which have been so meaningful to her. And now there is both an element of fear and this like anger of like, you weren't there for me when I needed you. Of course she knows that like they were swans, so like what were they gonna do? But there is still this like anger that is now a part of their relationship that wasn't there before. So that was like chapters 5 and 6. And then after that, in chapter 7, she starts this journey where she is essentially like just put in a boat by the lady of the forest and kind of sent off onto the next part of her journey. This is when we meet Red for for the first time, who, you know, is the older brother of Simon, who she nursed back to health, and he is now looking for his brother, but also, as we know, will become like the main love interest in the story. And so, you know, I had forgotten like how they first met, that he like saves her from drowning, and she of course is trying to escape because she is still like deeply traumatized from her experiences. But she ends up deciding to stay with him, and well, he decides to hold on to her because he finds among her things the little carving that Simon had given her, which apparently is like their house crest. And so he knows like, okay, you encountered Simon at some point. But of course she can't tell him where his brother is. So he takes her along with him, but then there are moments where she has the opportunity to leave and she decides to stay with him. And part of that is because like her alternative is to be captured and then potentially sent home back to Lady Una, in which case she would either die, at the very least she would be prevented from saving her brothers. So she decides to stay with Red, and we get to see parts of his personality starting to come out, as we get to know him, that he is a very like honorable person, very protective. He protects her in like multiple situations, even in the case where he is confronted by the fair folk. So there's this point where like they get ambushed by humans, and they fight them off, end up in like a cave, and Red is severely injured. And while he is sleeping, Sorca kind of gets lured by the fair folk into another part of the cave where the Lady of the Forest, among others, are there to kind of talk to her about her progress or lack of progress on the shirts, which I feel like is unfair, that they're like, you haven't made enough progress. And it's like, you're the ones who stuck her in a boat and put her just like out on the water. What did you think she was gonna do? But again, I don't think the fair folk are really known for their reasonableness. But they're talking to her and she's like speaking mind to mind with them because she obviously can't like talk with her mouth. But Red shows up and he tries to protect her, even in this situation where like he is very injured. He can barely stand upright, and yet he has no weapons. He's gonna try and protect her. And he doesn't even realize fully that these are like magical beings. There's literally nothing he could do to protect her, but he is still going to try his darndest, because he is a very like honorable, protective person, and she is now under his care. So he will protect her like to his last breath. So we really start to see that like part of his character coming out. And so yeah, she is now with Red. They're headed back to, is it Harrowfield? They're headed back to his home. And that is where I ended. I just got off work, thought I would do a quick update before I lose my light. I'm also testing a slightly different spot for filming, because my biggest issue with vlogging really is like, where do I film? Also, Merlin is here. I'm sitting on the floor. Merlin is right next to me because he is full of beans right now, and if I was not watching him, he would definitely destroy something. Like, sometimes he's calm enough that I can take my eyes off him and do something else, but right now he is in troublemaker mode, so I gotta keep an eye on him. But I read another 3 chapters of Daughter of the Forest, which is about 125-ish pages. It was chapters 8, 9, and 10, I think. So I am almost 3/4 of the way through the book. I am on page 378, but I've read about this much. And in these last couple of chapters, so Sorca has now come to Harrowfield, which is where Red lives. She is settling in and making friends, making enemies, mostly enemies, honestly, because people are not happy about her being there. We do get to meet Marjorie, who is John's wife. So Ben and John were the guys who were with Red when he found Sorca, and they are some of Red's like closest friends, and so they're pretty much the only people that she knows. And then we find out that John is married, his wife is Marjorie, and Marjorie's great because she is willing to really like go against the grain. All of the other ladies are very suspicious of Sorca. They all gossip about her, even though they're not supposed to. And Marjorie befriends her and like sits next to her and chats with, like talks to her while she is weaving. So we love Marjorie. Marjorie at the beginning of this is also pregnant, and you know, they're very excited, but there's also a little bit of worry because she and John previously lost a baby. And in these chapters, Marjorie does give birth, and Sorca assists her and uses her, you know, healing experience. She does also meet Simon's old dog, who immediately attaches herself to Sorca even though she hates everybody else. And I love this dog so much. And oh my god, nothing better happened to this dog. I don't remember if anything happens to her, but too many dogs have already died in this book. Like, I did not remember that there were so many animals that died in this book, and I'm very upset about it. And like, nothing better happened to this old little dog. Oh my god. Those are Sorca's little cohort of allies. Other than that, most people are just kind of vaguely suspicious of her. One actual like enemy that she has found is Richard, who is Red's uncle on his mother's side, who is the Lord of Northwood, which is nearby to them. And Richard, one, just terrible person. I hate him so much. Again, not a hot take because he's clearly a bad guy, but oh, he gets under my skin so much because he's so like, ugh, you know? He's so manipulative in this just really like icky way that I hate so much. And he's very controlling and very manipulative and really hates anybody that he can't control, which is why he has a real, like, there's a lot of tension between him and Red, because Red is one of the few people who refuses to be under his thumb, will not be taken in by his manipulations. Richard is obviously suspicious of Sorca and believes that she might know something about what happened to Simon. And this is a thing that I am trying to remember. Like, I cannot totally remember, but I kind of remember that maybe Richard betrayed Simon, and that he's not trying to find out what happened to Simon. He is afraid that Sorca will somehow expose him. He keeps trying to convince them to like bring her to Northwood, which like makes no sense. I don't know why Red's mother keeps being like, yes, it makes much more sense for her to go to Northwood. It makes no sense. Like, I don't understand why she thinks that would be a more logical place for Sorca to go. But I guess that just shows how convincing Richard can be to those who actually listen to him. Speaking of Richard, the big like tragedy of this section of the book, because I feel like every couple of chapters there's some kind of tragedy at this point. And the big tragedy of this is that Red's friend John dies in a rock slide, which at this point, I don't know if it's ever proven or if it's just suspected, but like we pretty much know that it was caused by Richard's men did this on his orders. Most likely they were actually meant to kill Red or Sorca, but John happened to be there. And it's just so tragic because like, one, John is a nice person, but two, like, you know, he and Marjorie are so in love and they just had their baby, and they're so happy, and then he dies. Oh my god, it just is like so tragic. And that was a part where it's like I knew it was coming up, and I kind of avoided reading for like a day or two because I just was like, oh, I don't want to read that part because it's so sad. And that has at this point put a rift to some extent between Red and Sorca. This is like at the end of the last chapter that I read. Before that point, we've been seeing the relationship between Red and Sorca building over the last few chapters as they get more opportunities to spend time together, and Red at least speaks to Sorca. And we get to learn a little bit more about him, and that he is a very like honest, kind, conscientious, responsible, thoughtful, honorable person. Like, he's just a good, decent human being, you know? And that's just what's so great about him. He's just like so solid, so dependable, so good. And I think that that is very, like, building that aspect of his character is so key to making this dynamic and relationship work. For multiple reasons. One, I think that it really is important for Sorca as a character because of the like traumatic experiences that she has had, that he is someone who is just so consistent, so patient, so good, and like just so through and through good, that he is a person that she could rely on. But also I think it's really important for their dynamic because the fact that she can't speak through all of this, like, they have a tiny bit of communication because she can like do different hand gestures and he's pretty good at like guessing what she's trying to communicate, but they can't really communicate well. They can't have like a conversation with each other. And I feel like in other circumstances, if I was watching a romance between two characters where the woman couldn't speak and the man was falling in love with her, and I would just be like, are you falling in love with her, or do you just love that there's a woman who won't speak and you can just talk as much as you want and she can't say anything? In other circumstances, it might be very easy to think that of a character, but in this case, I think it has clearly been established what kind of person Red is, and that is really not the case. There is a line in this when Red is talking to his mother or arguing with her, where she is talking about how he treats Sorca differently than like anybody else. They're arguing about Sorca because, oh yeah, also Red is betrothed. Red is betrothed to his uncle's daughter, so his cousin, Elaine, who she's very like reserved, but she seems like she might actually be an okay person for having such a horrible father. But he, you know, it's not like a love match, it's just strategic. But so they're supposed to get married pretty soon, and his mother is saying like, you have this random woman here that you brought from another country who you definitely give special treatment to and have a very confusing relationship with, and you're about to get married. Like, this is weird and I'm concerned. And like, I understand where she's coming from in this, but I want to say the quote that she says is, look at yourself for just a moment, for you speak to her as you do to no other. You speak to her as if to another self, which I think is a great quote. And I think also is kind of what their relationship will become, that these two people are like so suited to each other and become so close that they are like two parts of the same self. Anyways, that is where I am at. Hello, I am trying out a new vlogging camera that I just got. This is the first time I've had like a vlogging specific camera, and it is very tiny in comparison to my regular filming camera, but I'm testing it out right now. I read 4 more chapters of Daughter of the Forest, so I'm now like 90% of the way through this book. I only have like 2 chapters left, I think. I meant to stop after 3 chapters, but then the way the 3rd chapter that I read ended, I just was like, I have to keep going. Like, I have to know what happens, even though like I know what happens, but I have to know what happens. And I even stayed up later than I should have to read it. It still wasn't like super late. I stayed up until like 1 a.m. but it was a Sunday and I had to work the next day, and that is later than I normally stay up, you know, on a school night. So stayed up a little later to read that 4th chapter. So many things have happened. We are now at the point where just like everything's coming together. You know, so much of this book is so slowly paced. It is so much like laying the groundwork and really establishing all of these like characters and putting hints of things in places, and then finally everything is really coming together now. And it got very exciting very quickly. So what has happened in the last few chapters? Red skipped out on his wedding, which like Elaine, who he was supposed to marry, knew about it. He told her. And so Elaine is the daughter of Red's uncle, Richard. And Red and Elaine are like old childhood friends. She's not in love with him. We find out later that she was actually in love with Simon this whole time. So she wasn't like heartbroken that Red didn't marry her. She was just kind of like confused and disappointed because she was like, well, I kind of thought we were getting married. But he didn't go to his wedding. Instead, he takes Sorca down to like this little cove and they have a day at the beach, and he tells her a story about mermaids, and she's very surprised and impressed by his storytelling abilities. And then they get married, which his reasoning for this is that he thinks he finally found Simon and he needs to get there before anyone else, meaning his uncle, is able to get to him. So he has to leave, but he wants to give Sorca some kind of protection, and marrying her will give her protection. Honestly, I'm not really sure how he thought this was going to work, because it just, like, yes, it gives a degree of protection, but that's not enough. And he doesn't even like, again, I understand his reasoning, but he doesn't even like go back with her after they get married. He just sends her back with Ben to tell everybody, like, yeah, we got married, but then he disappeared. That was never going to work out well. And of course, it does not. What ends up happening is at the summer solstice, I think, her brother Connor comes. He's the only one who's able to make it. But he comes, turns back into a human, she hugs him, they get caught by Richard among other people, and so then she is charged with adultery, because obviously she can't explain it's her brother, and she's charged with being a spy, because they're like, obviously she was like feeding secrets to the enemy, and like she gets charged with like sorcery and a whole bunch of other stuff. So she's locked up for a while. Richard just has a field day, just unburdening his soul to her, telling her all the things, because he's like, haha, you can never tell anybody. And so she finds out all kinds of stuff about how like Richard didn't like it that his daughter Elaine wanted to marry Simon because he was the second son, and so he got rid of him. Also, apparently like Simon overheard something he wasn't supposed to, which is Richard, you know, betraying people. So he got rid of him, and like, you know, he tells her like all kinds of stuff. She goes through a trial, which she can't really defend herself because she cannot speak for herself, and there isn't anyone there to really like speak for her. Red is gone, and there is this guy, Father Dominic, who they brought in to kind of lend legitimacy to the proceedings, although it was supposed to be some other guy who Richard wanted, probably because that guy would just do whatever Richard wanted him to do. But Father Dominic had to sub in, and he is actually like interested in justice, which is, you know, who would have thought? And so, of course, Richard gets rid of him, sends him away, and just pronounces her guilty, and is like, she's gonna burn at the stake. And it all just becomes so dramatic, you know, because she's like on the pyre with the flames, and she's holding the shirts, and she mentally calls to her brothers, and the swans are coming, and she's trying to put the shirts on, but then Finbar isn't showing up because he's always the slowest to return. And then, just as she's about to like burn to death, Red shows up, and then one of Richard's men tries to shoot him with an arrow, and she like warns him, and then she's like, oh my god, I just ruined everything because I spoke before all of my brothers had their shirts. And then Red saves her. And at the last minute, this is the thing, at the last minute, Father Dominic comes back because Lady Anne went to go get him. So Lady Anne, I don't know if I talked about her that much before, but Lady Anne is Red's mother. And like, she hasn't been a very likable character up to this point. She is very like cold and removed. She is suspicious of Sorca, doesn't like her, although honestly I feel like her reasoning is not it's not unreasonable. But she does also sometimes allow herself to be manipulated and taken in by her brother Richard, which is not great. But at the end, she came through because ultimately she is like a very honorable person, which is probably part of where Red gets it from. That like, she was like, something is off, something is wrong, and this is unjust. And so she like herself went and chased down Father Dominic and brought him back so that he could say like, this is not what you're supposed to be doing, this is unjust. And so she brought him back, and what's really important about that is that he pronounced it a miracle that they turned from swans into humans. And that I feel like was a really important piece so that people didn't then go like, sorcery, you know? He pronounced it like as a man of the church that this was a miracle of God, and that Sorca is this like, you know, exceptional example of, you know, pious womanhood because of her like faith and self-sacrifice. They love self-sacrifice, you know? And that is just like so important that it did not allow people to like say that it was sorcery, even though it was. Anyway, so that was all just very dramatic, and I was like, I can't just end there, you know? So I had to read the next chapter. So Richard disappears mysteriously, and Red takes a group of people to like go chase him down. Sorca is reunited with her brothers, and her brothers are kind of annoying right now because it's like, again, understandable, but still, because they suddenly go into this like real like protective mode, you know, where they try to really take control of the situation. And I understand why, because like their sister just practically burned at the stake, you know, they are in enemy territory. There are certainly reasons why they would feel like, okay, we need to like take control of this situation. But also, like, Sorca has been living without their protection for what, like 3 years now, and they don't listen to her, you know? Finally, one of them does eventually say like, hey guys, with everything that Sorca's done for us, we probably shouldn't, like, we can't deny her anything, you know? She can kind of do whatever she wants. Which, like, finally someone said that, but they're all just, like, kind of annoyingly protective and, like, talking over her and making decisions for her. And it just annoyed me so much. Although they do make a good point that, you know, when they find out that she married Red, they bring up the point that she's very young. Now, for the time period, like, maybe she would have been married that young. I don't really know. But at this point, she's probably around 16, and we know that Red is I think they said he's like 22. Maybe he'd be 23 by that point. So, you know, it's, again, like, for the time period, maybe not the most wild age gap, but also it's like, this is clearly a fantasy, so it's kind of unnecessary to be like, you know what's the point of historical accuracy? That's the hill I'm gonna die on. Age gap relationships. So that's the thing that, you know, it doesn't stop me from liking them. But it is a thing that I always kind of side-eye about this. And the brothers, you know, bring that up as a good point. They're maybe one and only good point. But throughout all of this, eventually, Red does catch Richard, brings him back. Also, when Red came home, he brought Simon with him. He did find Simon, and Simon is back now. But seems very different. Like, he doesn't have any of the scars that he would have had from like the torture that he went through. He seems to have lost his memory to some degree. He doesn't seem traumatized like Sorca would have thought he was from having known him back when she did. So it's a little confusing. We later find out that Simon was taken by the fair folk. That's where he's been this whole time. And for him, it's been like 80 years with like the fair folk, which is wild. But that is why like he's missing the scars, because they just magically took them away. And I guess he has had a lot of time to mentally heal from his experiences. But the thing that was weird about this is that when Sorca is about to leave, she's about to like get on a boat with her brothers, go home. Simon is talking to her and is saying like, why didn't you wait for me? Like, because he was like, when I was in the fairy realm, you know, the whole time I was thinking like, I have to get back so that I can get back to you. And why didn't you wait for me like the people in like the stories that you told? Which is just, what? Like, that's essentially Sorca's response, is just like, I didn't know I was supposed to. Like, what? Because there was never, like, they never had a relationship like that. There was no indication that she should have waited for him. But in his mind, I guess for the last like 80 years, he's been building up this relationship in his mind and like holding on to it as kind of his like tether to the real world. And now he's like, it's another thing that my brother has stolen from me, because he feels like Red gets everything in life. I don't know. It was just such a bizarre interaction. But yeah, and so where I'm at, Sorca is going home with her brothers. She had kind of a weird parting with Red, because I think they both know that they're like in love with each other, but they also think that the other one isn't really in love with them, because he thinks like, oh, she really was just like only needed me for my protection, and so now she's leaving. And she's like, oh, he only helped me because the fair folk put like a magical command on him and he doesn't actually like me. So they had a real weird, intense parting. But that's where I'm at. Just all the things happening. Oh, also we found out that Richard was also colluding with Lady Una. So that was also a thing that was going on. Anyway, that's where I'm at. I'm about to film some sit-down videos, which is why I have my makeup done. But I thought I would take this opportunity of having my makeup done to do a quick wrap-up of Daughter of the Forest, since I finished reading it the other day. So these last two chapters, they make it home. They find Seven Waters essentially just in shambles because it has been completely neglected, as you know, Lady Una truly did not care about anybody in Seven Waters, and Lord Column, is that his name? Their father was like under her spell, and so was not really like doing his duty. So they find the place in shambles. Lady Una has disappeared. Their father is just like sitting in the garden, pretty much not talking to anyone. It seems like something is not quite right with him, that even though Lady Una is gone, there is no like showdown with Lady Una, which I was kind of anticipating. Like, I kind of wanted somebody to stand up to her, but also had been thinking like, what are they gonna do? Like, yeah, they broke the spell, but it's not like they have magic. So it's probably for the best that she just sort of disappeared, because really, what were they gonna do? And also, now that I think about it, I'm like, oh, right, because like she does show up later, so I guess it wouldn't have made sense at this point for them to have any kind of showdown with her. So she's disappeared. And they pretty much start picking up the pieces of Seven Waters and picking up the pieces for their father. You know, Liam really takes control of everything, which, like, in terms of Seven Waters, it's a good thing that Liam is like stepping into his role as the oldest son, but he also takes control in situations where like he doesn't need to, especially in relation to Sorca, because like she even says that they treat her as if they expect nothing to have changed from the point when they turned into swans, which is like, so many things have changed. It's been 3 years. She, like, the last time they saw her, she was like 13, I guess, and she's like 16 now, but also she's had all of these experiences. She's like suffered and sacrificed. She's almost died. Like, she's had traumatic experiences. Like, so much has happened. She can't just pretend, like, they can't just pick back up exactly where it is, where they're like, oh, you're like our little baby sister and I know best and I'm just gonna take control of everything. It's just kind of ridiculous and very annoying that Liam and other brothers are kind of treating the situation that way. But Liam is kind of stepping into his role, kind of interim Lord of Seven Waters. The second oldest brother, and who I never remember the name of, and Cormac go off to try and find Lady Una, and Finbar is really there helping their father to kind of put himself back together. And it's a really interesting like shift in their relationship, because there was always so much friction between the two of them. I think that their father really never understood Finbar, and Finbar just has such different like values, and was very outspoken about them and very like willing to stand up to his father, and wouldn't fall in line the way that some of the other brothers did. And so there was a lot of friction between the two of them before, but now Finbar is really able to support their father. Sorca kind of goes back into her role of taking care of the people of Seven Waters and their ailments, but she is realizing that she's in love with Red and how much she misses him. It really took her leaving to realize that she's in love with him, but she's still convinced that he never really loved her. He was just under the spell of like the fairies. But then like she talks to the Lady of the Forest, and the Lady of the Forest is like, what spell? What are you talking about? So then Sorca realizes that Red actually loved her, and he just was he's very much one like actions speak louder than words kind of person, and also just like a very self-restrained person. And I think he could tell that at the time she was not open to any romantic advances, and so he really was like keeping it close to the chest, that he cared about her, and was really just kind of showing through his actions that he cared. And she just really wasn't picking up on it because she had other stuff going on, which I think makes sense. But yeah, so she is really missing him when he shows up again, and he has made his way to Seven Waters, made his way through the forest, which I think is the forest and like the Lady of the Forest protecting him and letting him through, even though usually strangers can't get through on their own. But he allows himself to be captured so that he can be brought before the family of Seven Waters. They blindfold him, and her brothers and father kind of force him to declare like how he feels about Sorca. And so he sort of like tells their story. And I have mixed feelings about this, because it's like, I understand that there was a purpose for it. One being that because he's such an emotionally reserved person, it kind of forced him to express his feelings, which he may not have done if he was not under duress like that. And also because her brothers and father don't know this person, and he is a Briton, he is their enemy, and so they kind of feel like he needs to prove that he truly loves her. But also it feels kind of unnecessary, because I am just frustrated at this point with them being in her business. Like, I was like, she saved your lives. She survived for the last 3 years without you. I think she gets to make any and all decisions about her own life with zero input from any of you. Like, I don't know. I just feel like it was a little unnecessary, and that it could have been a more like private moment for them, but they had their reasons, I guess. Although, so like he tells this whole story, he essentially tells their story and how much he's in love with her, but there are a couple points that are like kind of weird. Like there's one point where he talks very briefly about like wanting her hands on his body, and it's like, you know, you're talking to her father and brothers, right? Like, just, you don't need to say that part, just leave that out. And then after he tells his story and she takes the blindfold off and they kiss, they like go straight into like fully making out, and it's like very intense, and it's like, your brothers and father are standing right there. This is very uncomfortable for everybody. It was a little weird. But after that, yeah, Red starts to kind of integrate himself into the world of Seven Waters, and he starts to also integrate himself into the stewardship of Seven Waters, because Liam is very focused on more of the like political elements of Seven Waters, because, you know, there was betrayal from one of their neighbors who they thought was a friend, and like they're making all these plans and stuff. And so Red really takes up the reins of that, like, you know, stewardship or husbandry of like the land and the people. And so he is already kind of finding his place. I gave this 5 stars. I think that if I was being more objective, it might be more like a 4-star, because I can see that, you know, it has its flaws. But for my own personal rating, like I'm not being objective about it, I'm giving it 5 stars. I loved it. Bless you. But like there are some things about it, like the pacing is incredibly slow for the first like 3/4 of the book, and while there are parts of that I really appreciate, because it means that we really get time to establish the world, the characters. We also get to like really feel time passing, which honestly is important because Sorca is like aging up, which is a whole other thing. But we get to really feel the passage of time. We all know I love a slow book. I love things that move slowly. And as I've talked a lot in this vlog, I really appreciate that slow start to the book and how it is really establishing these characters and the setting and the relationships, and we're getting to see Sorca grow up, and we can feel that passage of time. But I just feel like it could be maybe a little more balanced. I also think that if I was reading this for the first time, I would want more out of the romantic relationship. And this is, again, something where I'm like, I see both sides of it, in that the relationship is built very subtly, because Sorca is not thinking of it romantically. She has her mind, but both because of her past experiences and because she has her mind on other things, she has other priorities at the time, she's not really like engaging in this relationship with any romantic ideas at all. However, I also feel like I would have liked a little bit more time with them together, especially because they can't really speak to one another. I just would have liked more, I don't know, a little bit more from the relationship. Maybe it's a little more time, a little more tension between them, even if she didn't realize that it was romantic tension. I just felt like there could have been something else there. And like, I love them together, but if I was reading this for the first time, I could see it being harder to like get invested in that romance potentially. The other thing about the romance is like the age gap that's in it, that's just kind of unnecessary. I think when they first meet, she is 15 and he's like 22. By the end, it's like a year later or something. So she's like 16, he's 23. And there isn't really a reason that she needs to be that young. It is also frequently brought up that she's like a child, you know? He calls her a child multiple times. And I'm like, that just, like, not that it's not true, and I think that she probably could have just been aged up a little bit, but it also doesn't help to continually call her a child and then do a real quick switcheroo and be like, never mind, I'm in love with you. It does not stop me from liking these characters together, and I fully admit that part of that is just because I have so much like nostalgia for this series that I'm just like, well, it just is what it is, you know? If I was reading this for the first time, it might bother me more. So as I said, if I was being more objective, maybe it's more of a 4-star. But my personal rating, just because I love it so much, was 5 stars. I loved being back in this world. I'm so glad that I reread this because it has been such a long time since I have read it, and there's so much that I had forgotten about it, but I'm just so happy to be back in this world, and I really want to reread at least the first 3 books in the series, but I'll probably eventually like end up rereading the entire series. But thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.